ordinary prisoner, he'd been one of the most recognised faces in Melbourne's notorious gangland war that claimed more than 35 lives over a decade.
The third man, Carl Williams, today pleaded guilty to
Carl Williams confessed to being the driving force behind Carl Williams is one of the last men left standing. Carl Williams was head of a gang that waged a long-running battle with the so-called Carlton crew on the streets of Melbourne, fighting for drugs, turf and power. Williams believed himself to be an all-powerful criminal kingpin. A string of payback murders began when, as a 29-year-old, he was shot in the abdomen by fellow underworld figure Jason Moran, although there were no names named at the time.
You don't know who shot you?
No, I don't know who shot me.
What, you have your eyes shut at the time? Or?
Yeah, well,
Welcome to the True Crime Kid channel, and in this video we'll be taking a look at one of Melbourne's most notorious criminals, the baby-faced assassin, Carl Williams. Carl Anthony Williams was born on the 13th of October in 1970 in Melbourne, Australia. Carl had the appearance of a lazy, overweight teenager, but looks can be deceiving, and Carl Williams played a crucial role in Melbourne's underworld and the horrific gangland feud which followed.
He was the baby-faced drug lord embroiled in a decade of tit-for-tat killings, and the murder of gangland boss Carl Williams provided a sensational climax to Melbourne's underworld war.
Carl was very close with his parents, George and Barbara Williams. His father, George Williams, was meant to be an old-school criminal, and everyone said that Carl was a mummy's boy. He was also very close with his older brother Shane Williams, who later died in 1997 from a heroin overdose. Williams attended Broadmeadows Technical School, leaving in year 11. Carl spent much of his early life in Western Melbourne with his childhood friends and his older brother Shane, who later died from an overdose in 1997. Some people say this may have been the start and the turning point in Carl's life, a story and a journey which would lead Carl into one of Melbourne's biggest and most horrific gangland feuds.
But for the cameras, he always played the fool.
no, I don't know who shot me.
Well, you have your eyes shut at the time? Or?
Yeah, well, I've got no idea really who shot me.
But Carl Williams had a very clear idea about who shot him and got his revenge.
Carl started his early criminal career as a worker and an associate of the Moran crime family. The Morans were a well-known and dangerous firm at the time in Melbourne. The family was run by brothers Jason and Mark Moran. In the early years, Carl used to deal with Jason and Mark, mostly making, supplying and dealing drugs, pills mostly, but this relationship would soon turn into a deadly rivalry after a dispute over a pill press and a load of pills. On the 25th of November 1999, Carl, along with his father George, would be arrested and charged with drug trafficking after police had turned up to an address located in Fir Close, Broadmeadows. The police discovered Carl had his dad George hiding the pill press which was running at the time, and they discovered over 25,000 tablets with an estimated worth of 20 million. Of course, losing that much money and product was bound to cause tensions, as the Morans claimed the drugs and the pill press was theirs, and as far as they was concerned, Carl now owed them, and he had to pay one way or another. Mark and Jason would get their chance a few weeks later, beginning the infamous feud in Melbourne's underworld. Carl and the Morans had arranged a meeting in a local park to try to resolve the issues. Carl had turned up, and not long after, Mark and Jason turned up, but they had no interest in listening to Carl's excuses. Jason produced a gun and shot Carl once in the stomach. Mark told Jason to finish Carl off, but Jason refused, leaving Carl alive but telling him he still owed them over £80,000. Jason and Mark Moran had underestimated Carl because of his appearance, and this would soon come back to haunt them, and this incident kicked off the biggest gangland feud that Australia has ever seen. Some say this was a very big mistake and very costly to leave Carl alive, and this would come back to haunt the Morans and many other underworld crime figures at Melbourne at the time. Carl would hold on to a bitter grudge, and from that day go on a bloody rampage for murder and revenge. Carl's first real retaliation came on the 15th of June 2000 when Mark Moran was gunned down outside his house. It said Mark was the more ruthless and intelligent of the brothers, and this is why Carl wanted him out the way first. The murder of Mark Moran was one of the only murders in which Carl was said to have a real hand in doing personally himself, and not long after this, Carl would meet his two most deadly and efficient hitmen, the Runner and Andrew Benji Veneman. Carl now had two ruthless and efficient killers by his side, and they would go on a killing spree said to be responsible for over 20 murders. Along with his hitmen, Carl was linked with dozens of murders, although he was only charged with 4. The murders of Jason Moran in 2003, which was an horrific crime where he was shot in a minivan with his children in the back at point blank range. The Runner was the alleged gunman and responsible for the hit on Jason Moran. Also that year, Mark Mallia, a well-known face and criminal in Melbourne's underworld, was shot to death in 2003. Another well-known face and criminal, Michael Marshall, was also shot in the same year. Finally, the murder of Lewis Moran, father of Jason and Mark, in 2004. It is well known in the criminal underworld that Carl was responsible for the murder of Mark Moran back in the year 2000, but he was never charged with this murder. Carl and his hitmen would also be linked with dozens of other murders in the Melbourne underworld, but Carl's life and crimes he had committed would soon come back to haunt him, and the tables would soon turn. Not long after this, Carl would go through a tragic event, as he would lose his best friend and main hitman, Benji Veneman, who would meet his demise after a meeting with a fellow underworld figure, Mick Gatto, from the Carlton crew, who would shoot Benji dead after a heated confrontation. Carl would now find himself a lot more vulnerable after being left without his main enforcer and muscle. Soon after this, Carl would be arrested and charged with the murders, and now Carl's other hitman, the Runner, would turn police informant. The Runner's reasons for turning police informant was that Carl shortchanged him on the hits and the contracts and would never pay him the agreed amount. Carl shortchanging the Runner would soon come back to haunt him. On the 28th of February 2007, Carl Williams pleaded guilty to the murders of Lewis and Jason Moran, as well as Mark Mallia, in the Supreme Court of Victoria. Carl was sentenced to life imprisonment without a non-parole period of at least 35 years. But Carl's story does not quite end there. In April of 2010, inmate Matthew Charles Johnson would attack and kill Carl Williams at Barwon Prison. Carl was beaten to death with the handle of an exercise bike. Carl, a man who was responsible for much violence and pain, had now met a violent death, and Matthew Johnson would be charged with the murder of Carl Williams and sentenced to 32 years in December 2011. This has been the story of Carl Williams, Melbourne's babyface killer. If you like the content, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.